in the 1950s and 60s, my grandfather was president of Collier's Encyclopedia. Now, for anybody under the age of 30, encyclopedias were like today's internet, but on paper, a lot of paper. They'd come in sets of about 20 books labeled A through Z, and they were kind of like manuals of the world. They'd had information on everything from Aristotle to zoology. And when I was in school, if I had to write a paper for my history class or my English class, I would leaf through the pages of my parents' encyclopedia looking for the information. Admittedly, these encyclopedias were not quite as comprehensive as today's internet, and often I couldn't find the topics I was writing about. So I'd go to my father and he'd take me to the library. We'd sit down and talk to the librarian about the books I needed to do the research for my papers. Now, the encyclopedias my parents had, we got for free because my grandfather was president of Collier's. But he didn't start at the top. He worked his way up as an encyclopedia door-to-door salesman. Now, for anybody under 30, door-to-door salesmen were kind of like Amazon Marketplace. But instead of you going online and buying something you really want, these men would knock on your door and try to sell you whatever they had. Encyclopedias, dishes, vacuum cleaners. And my grandfather, his sales calls would usually entail knocking on the door. The homeowner would invite him in and have him sit down at the coffee table. People were a lot more friendly back then. And he'd go into his spiel of the wonders of encyclopedias. He would also end up talking about more personal things. He had a long day, he was really stressed out. Boy, could he use a drink at the end of the day. Well, the homeowner would often say, "Oh, I can whip up a couple cocktails for us." This was in the 50s and 60s when there was a lot of day drinking going on. And after a couple of martinis, sure enough, the homeowner would say, "I need these encyclopedias. I can't go on without them." So my grandfather would make the sale, and then he'd go to the local bar to meet up with his other door-to-door salesmen, and they'd drink some more, and they'd talk about the people they met, the stories they heard. They'd share tips on what sales pitch worked, what sales pitch didn't. And after a couple hours of drinking and talking, my grandfather would go home, and my grandmother would not be really happy with him late at night like this, and a fight would usually start. But my grandfather, the savvy businessman that he was, came up with a scheme to avoid these fights. He would get home, he'd crack open the door, take off his hat, men wore hats in those days, and he'd throw it into the front hallway. If the hat came flying back at him, he knew my grandmother was awake, she was not happy with him, and he'd better stay out until she calmed down. If the hat didn't come flying back at him, he knew she was asleep, and he could walk in quietly and sleep on the couch. Now, as my grandfather went through the years doing these sales, he slowly worked his way up through the management of Collier's. And one day when he was going through the books of the company, he noticed their biggest competitor, Encyclopedia Britannica, was making a lot more sales going door to door. And he wanted to find out what was going on. So he decided to recruit a spy, my father, who was about 20 years old at the time. And he had my father sign up for a salesman training with Encyclopedia Britannica, pretending he wanted a job. And he gave my father a briefcase and a tape recorder. And he said, "Record the entire session." So my father went, recorded everything. When he brought the tape back to my grandfather and he listened to it, my grandfather learned a valuable bit of information. Encyclopedia Britannica was telling their salesmen that every time someone would buy a set of encyclopedias, they would get a free dictionary. Now, for anybody under 30, dictionaries were like spell check on computers, but a lot of paper. We literally had growing up an encyclopedia was that over a foot thick, thousands of pages with every word in the English language. So Encyclopedia Britannica were giving out these books free with a set of encyclopedias. Well, my grandfather came up with an even better scheme. He told his sales team, "Don't sell the encyclopedias, sell the dictionaries. And tell the homeowner, you buy one dictionary, you get an entire set of 20 encyclopedias for free." Now, little did the homeowner know that they're paying the same price they would have paid for the encyclopedias for this one book, but in their heads, they're getting 20 free books for the price of one. Sales went through the roof, and it helped propel my grandfather to become president of the company. Now, all of this may sound very old-fashioned, and I know today in our digital age with the internet, things are a lot easier. Right now, if we want to buy something, we can go on our phone right now, and with one swipe of our finger, buy anything we want, and it'll show up on our front doorstep without ever having to talk to a pesky salesman. If we want to do research on something, we go online, the world is at our fingertips with every bit of information. Happy hours with colleagues that you've probably never even met because everybody is working from home. You don't even have to leave your couch. You can do a Zoom call with colleagues and never have to go into a bar. You don't even need spies these days. You just wait to get invited to a signal chat and all the military secrets show up. But I have to say I like the old-fashioned days when if you needed a manual on life, you would go through the pages of a book or sit down and talk to your friends, family, colleagues, and maybe even a friendly salesman who shows up on your front door. Thank you.